Get ready before life happens. The podcast helping you navigate life's what ifs.
Welcome to Get Ready Before Life Happens. I'm your host, Tony Stewart. Today, I'm joined by Linda Grizely, creator of the MeMoney Method and host of Real Money, Real Life podcast. Linda, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Tony. I'm so excited to be here talking about money, changing the way people think about money. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to have you on. We had some great conversations offline, and so here we go. So let's jump in. Tell us a little bit about yourself. What is your origin story, and how did it lead you to creating the Me Money Method and launching your podcast?
Well, I have a lot of origin stories, so that would take all day. I've recreated myself so many times. I'll start with I started a career in financial services about 7 years ago and worked, under broker dealers and then worked at an RIA, did, fee-based planning, fee-only planning, advice-only planning. I've done a lot of different models. And now I focus on coaching and teaching people. So people that feel like they're behind. And part of my origin story of MeMoney is because I put my husband on a budget. So my husband didn't realize how much money he was spending, and I wanted him to be more aware. He's a spender, but an avoider. And so I put him on a budget and said, this is how much money you have to spend per month. And then he said, are you going to give yourself the same amount? And I said, yeah, I will. And then I did. And then without going into the whole story right now, the results were mind blowing for so many different reasons. And so I really leaned into that. And I started having clients implement that same strategy, giving themselves me money. And it made such a huge difference because it worked with anyone's money personality. And that is the story about how me money came about.
Well, that's awesome. So, I want to go back to the first thing you said about recreating yourself multiple times is that takes a lot of courage to recreate yourself. So, there's a lot of people who are doing things and they're not very happy. What was, sort of a sign that it was time to do something else? And how did you actually take that leap of, I guess, faith?
Taken many leaps of faith. So, let's start with the leap of faith that I took after I got divorced, which is a leap of faith in itself. Starting in like a new life and having that courage to start over is one thing. Then I had to recreate myself to, get back into the workforce in the right way because I owned a business, a women's fitness center that I had to sell. So I needed to get back and get a real job. And I found this job that I thought was like the perfect job for me. Loved the job, horrible environment, but also wasn't making enough money to survive. So that's one of the big leaps of faith that I took was I left that job as a single parent and went to school. So I had never had the opportunity to get a bachelor's degree. I didn't really think that was ever in the cards for me, but I was like, I'm going to make this happen. And I did. So that was a huge leap of faith because stepping away from a job to go to school and go backwards after you've been recently divorced is not something that most people do or that most people would advise doing. And I don't necessarily say I advise doing it, but I was on a mission and I really needed I knew that I needed to make bold steps to make my life a difference in my life because I was going to keep living the same life if I didn't take those bold steps. So that was one. Another bold step I took was when I left my last corporate job, working, doing financial planning and leading a team to going into what I do now, which is coaching, because people think I'm crazy. Why would you leave financial planning? Why aren't you working with people that have millions of dollars? That's where you make the money. Well, there's enough people out there that are at this in-between stage where they feel like they're behind or they don't know enough. They don't have enough money to go to an advisor and they can't afford to pay an advisor a fee that they would want it. So I have courses in coaching, group coaching, things that are available to people, and I'm filling a need for a gap that was there. And that was another big, bold step, because it was like, hey, here you have this secure job making great money, but you're going to leave that and you're going to go into something that people don't think is lucrative. People don't think it's going to make you money. And yeah, I want to have a big impact and I want to help a lot of people, but I also want to make money.
Yeah, well, that's great. And I think, to go back to where you started, is that it does take a lot of courage to start over. However, I think the most important thing that you said is that if you don't make a change, you'll continue to lead the same life. And that's something that we tend to do both, in our lives overall, as well as on our financial journeys, is we tend to keep doing the same thing and we get the same results. So, making those changes are so important. And, it came at a time of transition for you, which is usually the launching point for making a change anyway for most people. So that's amazing.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah. So, let's talk. One of the things that, prompted the show is about women being seen and heard in the money world. And do you feel that women are truly seen and heard in the money world?
I think it's getting better. I still think we're not equal. And it's not necessarily because I'm not sure how to say it, but I don't think that we were brought up to talk about money the same way that men were, right? It's not as normal for us to talk about money. It's normal for men to talk about money. They can be at the golf course and talking about their investments, or sitting at a dinner and talking about their investments, but women aren't expected to talk about that like that. And I feel like that narrative needs to change. And I think part of it is because men are used to more of that like competition all the time. And that I think they feel like, oh, I did this and I did that. Not that they're bragging, they're sharing at the same time, but women are less likely to talk about things like that because they feel like if they did, that they would be bragging or they would be revealing something that they shouldn't be revealing. When there's lots of ways to talk about money that doesn't reveal things. You know what I'm saying? Like, you don't have to say, I have this much money. You just have to say, oh, I heard about this process, or I heard about this tool. And, let's talk about it. Have you heard of this? Do you think this is a good thing to do? How are you handling, your finances? What are you doing that's making you successful? There's nothing wrong with talking about that stuff. So I
Yeah.
just feel like that the conversation needs to keep happening.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think part of it is, with my generation, is my mother, she wasn't the one who had really anything to do with the money. She didn't like to talk about it. My dad handled the money and everything. And that's just the way it was in a lot of households. I mean, women can have credit cards, what, till the 70s, or sign a mortgage or anything. So part of it is how some of us were brought up if we're of a certain age, where just women just didn't talk about money. So I think that is so important, that women should feel open, that it's okay to talk about money. And I mean, that can be that same courageous, bold step that you talked about earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just taking one little step. I think that women feel like it's over. No, I shouldn't just say women, but some people feel like money is just overwhelming, right? It's just there's so much to think about. And I feel like they think if they start paying attention that they have to do a whole bunch of things, when really they can just take simple small steps and work their way into those other things. So whether that's just reviewing your bank statement or your app, on a monthly basis to make sure there's no charges or no subscriptions you forgot about, or things like that just look wonky to you, right? Just reviewing it. But at the same time, when you're doing that, you're getting an idea of what you're actually spending, where your money is going. Because a lot of people just go through their day and they're like, as long as they don't bounce it, they don't, I say bounce a check, but you know what I mean? They don't overdraw. As long as they don't overdraw, they're like, oh, I'm good. but they're not really paying attention and getting in tune with where their money is going.
Yeah, I think paying attention and getting in tune is so important. And I think one of the things that that I've heard from so many people is that money is overwhelming. And that is 100% true. There's so many things when we think about the world of money, your investments, your insurance, your debt, your credit, I mean, all these things. It's a lot, but it's like anything is you take one small step at a time and then you can do everything. But
Yeah.
it's taking those small steps and learning how to break it up so you're not worried about it because you're not going to be able to do it all at once. It's impossible.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yep. So
So
just take one thing and start small and then snowball it.
I like that. Take one thing and start small. And yeah, I completely agree with you that that is sort of what people need to do. Is so if you're listening or watching and you're thinking about all these different things, is that's all you have to do is just choose one small action to take today to get started, and the rest will follow. um, so one of the things when I've had women on the podcast is they talk about that women often put themselves last. I know my wife can tend to do this sometimes. She's worried about her job, she's worried about the kids, she wants to take care of me, she wants to do all these things. So when women are putting themselves last, how do they switch gears and start putting themselves not necessarily first, but putting themselves in an equal position in sort of that hierarchy of things that they have to attend to?
Yeah, stop putting yourself last. That's one of my main messages. And that is my answer to that is MeMoney. That is literally my answer because um, I was a person who always put myself last. So I felt guilty anytime I spent money on myself. I'm not saying I didn't spend money on myself. I did. But when I gave myself the money that was just set aside for me, it allowed me to stop saying no to myself. It allowed me to stop answering to myself because I had the money already there. And I was like, ooh, I want that. But I probably would never spend that much money on myself. But you know what? I have the money. It's already set aside for me. I can do that. And that was part that was like mind blow. One of the parts that was like mind blowing to me of when I put my husband and I on this budget. I mean, for him as a spender and an avoider, it gave him intention around his money, and he just started making better choices because he was like, "Oh, if I say yes to this now, then I won't have that money later for this. So I'm going to say no to this now." And he wasn't feeling restricted because he didn't need that thing. He was just making a better choice. And then for me, I stopped feeling guilty about spending money on myself. So instead of justifying 10 different times something for $10 10 different times because I can justify that. Now I can justify something for $100 without thinking twice because the money's already in my account. It's already there for me. And then maybe I'm not buying those 10 other things for $10. So maybe I'm spending the same amount of money, but I'm getting the thing I really want rather than 10 things that I kind of want.
I think that's really important is that you can spend money. It's just that you have to make choices on what you spend money on. And I think that's the toughest thing. And I think a lot of people have trouble spending money. And we can especially see that with people who are retiring. And the whole thing is because you've accumulated for so many years, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, go ahead and spend your money. And you're like, wait, I don't know how to spend money. So, I mean, is that something that's part of what you coach? Is like, how do you get people to sort of flip that switch to say, it's okay if I spend some money?
Yeah, and I've actually done so I have a Me Money presentation that I do, and I've actually done it for retire specifically focused on retirees and saying like this is you build that mountain of money when you're accumulating, right? You're building, you're saving, your retirement funds are growing, 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 and all of a sudden you're at the top of this mountain, and now you have to figure out how to get safely down the other side. How do I get down? How do I rappel down the mountain without losing my footing, without, the mountain crumbling away from underneath me? And that's scary. And it's a completely different mindset. So, like overnight, talk about bold moves. Overnight, you've gone from this way you've lived your whole entire life of saving, saving, saving. And now you're like, okay, it's time to spend it, but spend it safely. This is like a really stressful time, money wise, right? You think retirement, oh, hey, carefree, I can go live in retirement, but you need to be sure that you're not going to outlive your money. And so it's hard for people because let's say that they always dreamed that when they retired, they would go travel, or they dreamed when they retired, they would have, a second place, like somewhere warm or near their grandkids or whatever. And now you get there and you have to spend that money. And you're like, but if I spend it, I might not make it till the end. Or you could be a person who's like just spending it all and you're, doing all these things and you're not going to make it to the end. Right. So this is why people do go to financial planners and they have financial plans. But the idea of putting a MeMoney bucket in there or specifically setting aside money for these things is so that it keeps guardrails on it and it keeps intention to that money. It allows you to spend if you're a person who's a saver or a security seeker, it allows you to spend. If you're a person who is either a spender or a risk taker, or a person who likes to do like big things, then it puts those intentions to it so that you're thinking about each choice that you make when you spend the money from a smaller perspective, not from one giant bucket of money. You're taking it just from this little piece, like, can I afford this within this little piece? And so it just puts it into a completely different perspective.
That's awesome. And I think that's wonderful advice is, having that bucket where it's okay to spend. And I think that's, and you mentioned it earlier, is that's why you need a plan when you retire. This is not an advertisement to go out and hire a financial planner, but financial planners do provide a significant amount of value in this area and figuring out, like, okay, what is my spending plan? Um, because we don't think about that as like, okay, because that's everybody's number one fear is like, oh my gosh, I'm going to run out of money in retirement and I'm going to have to live on the streets when I'm 90 years old. And
Yeah.
so it's like, you have to balance that fear with the reality that you have accumulated money and that it's okay to spend some of your money. So,
Yeah.
so actually, that's probably a really good question. Is what do you say to people you're coaching when they say, I'm just scared. I have a fear of spending money.
That's normal. First of all, you're not the only one. Like, you should have a fear of spending money because you should be worried about your future. And that's a good thing. So it's a good thing to be afraid of spending money. But it's also good to figure out what your reality is and put together a plan and understand how you're going to be able to do that safely. So like in financial planning, you go to a financial planner and they put the plan together for you. In financial coaching, I can teach you how to do your own financial plans. Like I can teach you how to do that. There's software that you can use and I can coach you through that. And it'll model out, and nothing is perfect, right? It'll model out though what it looks like for the future and whether it thinks your plan will succeed or not. And you can decide then, how much money you can safely spend in order to get there. And there's different theories that you can use and different calculations that you can use if you don't want to use the software. But it's really sitting down with someone and helping them, making sure that you understand all of the pieces that go into that. So it's about your daily living costs, like how much does it cost you to live for one day? How much does it cost you to live for a month? What happens if you have a medical event? What happens if you need long-term care? What happens if your spouse passes away? What happens if your spouse is injured? There's all these different scenarios that go into financial planning as, holistic planning, which includes not just your money, but insurance and things like that. And it's not to be like meant to be like a sales call. It's just meant to be like a wake up call. Like part of financial planning is figuring out a way for things to work no matter what happens, right? And figuring out how to spend your money is one piece of that.
I love that because I think, these are things that we don't normally think about is even in the financial planning world is I was a insurance consultant working with financial planners, and insurance wasn't always factored in, yeah, as a main spending thing, especially for clients. And another thing is medical expenses and all these things, because we tend to think of, certain fixed costs, like the cost of our housing and other things. But as you point out, long-term care or long-term costs, if we need that care, is big, and it's potentially something that can change your life if you're not prepared for it. So preparing for all those eventualities, yeah, it's super important. So, one of the things is to get back to, what you talk about is reconnecting with our power. What does that mean to reconnect with our power?
To me, that means understanding who you are as a person. How do you interact when we're talking about money specifically? How do you interact with money? How do you interact with life? What is your life like? What is it that's uniquely you? And that's your power. When you understand how you interact with your money and you then use that as your base point and your superpower with money, and you lean into that rather than work against it, that's when you start seeing success. Because if you think about, like, just take budgeting, for example, if you take someone who's naturally a spender or a risk taker, and I'm talking about the money personalities that I identify, but you hopefully can figure out what those mean. Someone who likes to spend money, or someone who likes to do big things like events and go big or go home kind of stuff. If you're that person and you try to put that person on a budget, do you think that they're going to succeed with that budget? They're not. They're going to fail at that budget because that's not who they are. They putting them in those boundaries, those restrictions is setting them up to fail because that's not who they are. But if you take that person who they are and they say, okay, you're this person and this is what you like to do and this is how you interact with money. Take MeMoney, for example. We're going to give you this much money. This is your if you're the risk taker who likes the risk taker is a person who likes to do things like they like events. They like to have good experiences. Like they would probably be one that would be traveling a lot. So you set aside money that's specifically for that. And you say, here's your bucket of money for you to go do all those things with, but you have to stay within this bucket. And then that way they're not just pulling everything from the bigger bucket because they don't have a guardrail, you know, and they're not having intention around what they're doing. On the same hand, if you're a security seeker and you're someone who always likes to have everything planned and you need to know where everything is going and you're worried that you're going to outlive your money and maybe you didn't save enough and so you're aware of that. But at the same time, you might be completely restricting yourself from having a life. What's the point of living if you're not going to enjoy your life because you're so worried? So giving yourself something like MeMoney, and I keep using that as an example because that's what I do, but that gives you that place to be like, this is my safe space and it's set aside and it's a planned amount. So it's okay for me to spend that money on myself. There's lots of different things that you can do based on your money personality. My MeMoney is just one example, but that's about how you take your power and who you are and interact with your money in the same way to make it work for you.
Yeah, I mean, what I think of is I used to river raft, and that was always the thing: is go with the flow. You can't fight the river, and that's was immediately where my mind went when you were talking about that. Is you can't fight your money mindset or how you like to do things, nor should you, because it's how you like to do things, and that's the whole point of life. Is your money should empower you to do the things that you want to do, rather than just constantly doing maybe what everybody else says or thinks we should do. And
Yeah.
that's the problem that I have with a lot of popular financial advice, is it puts things into a straitjacket, and it's not that simple.
Yeah. Yeah. The other money personality that don't think I've mentioned is the avoider. And so there's a person that just avoids money. They're just like, as long as my bank account is okay, maybe I did say it, but that person, if you think about that, and if you bring them in, let's say you're a financial advisor and you bring them in and you start to try to do a plan and like work everything out, like that's so much information overload for them because they're an avoider. Like that's just going to be like way too much. So you have to start them smaller. You have to start them very small. A person who's a security seeker, yes, let's do the plan. Let's get into the details. Let's get everything all set. They're going to want to lean into that right away. So if you're a financial planner or an advisor and you have that same process, then it's not going to work the same for those different money personalities. And you mentioned briefly how some financial advisors didn't even bring insurance into the equation, things like that. I just want to mention that there are many different versions of financial advisors. One financial advisor does not do the same thing that another financial advisor does. They're very, very different. So you hear people say, like, oh, I need to get a financial advisor, or I should get a financial advisor. And I think the message that I'm trying to say is that you need to get someone that can help you with your money the way you need help with money. And it's not as simple as just go getting a financial advisor.
I think that is so valuable to understand is that financial planners work in different ways, and the term financial advisors covers a whole huge spectrum of people doing very different things,
Yes.
and that you have to understand what the person you're hiring does and what their services are, and then make sure they mesh with you, is because that's so common as people go, well, this person didn't help me. And it's like, well, they're not even the person you really need or looking for. So, I mean, that starts with yourself. So what would you tell somebody who's gone, okay, I don't even know where to get started. Who the heck should I hire?
You should hire me.
Okay. That's
I'm the
easy.
person to
Okay.
help you
Well,
get
in now.
started. um, yeah. So the thing is that you need to understand how this person is getting paid, right? Understand how they're getting paid, and that will help you figure out whether they're really truly acting in your best interest or they're trying to earn a commission. And that's not to say that one model is bad or not bad. And maybe that is something that you need that they're trying to sell you, but just understand it so that you can understand what their motivations are about what their business model is. And then, find someone that like, and trust, and but ask all the right questions. So what I do as a financial coach and a financial educator is I help people understand where they are, what they need. I can do all the things that a financial planner or advisor can, except give financial advice, like tell them how to invest or how to or do their plan for them. But the biggest thing is that I look at myself as a bridge. I'm creating an opportunity for people that maybe aren't ready to go work with an advisor or don't want to work with an advisor because they feel like they might be taken advantage of. So it's a safe space. And there's lots of other people out there like me that are creating this safe space for people to go, you don't have to move your money to me. I'm not going to sell you. I'm not going to try to sell you anything. If I give you advice, it's going to be like, hey, you should look in this because this is how I feel like it would fit into your financial picture. And there would be a reason behind it, not just a sales pitch, because I'm not the one that's going to be earning a commission off of it if I'm recommending something to you. And then I can teach you about the different ways to invest. And then from that point, you're educated. So you're educated and you've learned a lot. And now if you want to go work with an advisor, you can go work with an advisor and you're going to know what questions to ask and where to start and just be set up in a completely better place so that you aren't taken advantage of by someone who's just selling things.
I think the most powerful thing that consumers can do is to ask questions. And that I love that approach. And I think we're seeing a lot of that is that a lot of financial advice is happening outside the traditional financial planning space. Most people don't have a financial planner and will probably never meet with a financial planner. And then we look at the representation among CFPs, what 30% of CFPs are women? That's not representative of the US population. I think 1% of CFPs are Black women. That's not representative of the population. So that there is this whole thing taking place outside the traditional financial services, because it gets back to our earlier question about being seen and heard in the money world. A lot of people don't feel like they're being seen and heard. So the message is to my friends in the financial planning community is, think about this and to reflect on this and make sure that people feel seen and heard because, we look at the stats, 80 to 90% of widows will leave their current financial planner. Same for divorcees. And it gets back to the whole thing. It may get back to the money personalities, not talking to the avoider, but when you're in a client meeting and you're not talking to the wife, that's a problem,
Yeah.
so
Yeah, definitely. And I've seen that a lot. I mean, it's really truly there where people just talk to the one person in the relationship and the other one just kind of sits there. And sometimes it's actually flipped. Sometimes it's the woman who's the dominant partner in the finances in the relationship and the man just sits there. And even in same-sex couples, there's always one that's more dominant. But the idea is that you have to be sure as the advisor or the person working with them that you're taking into account both of their money personalities and both of their objectives. Um, I tell women who have let their husband do their financial planning and know nothing about their financial plan that they really especially need to figure out to learn and find out what has been done because a lot of times the men are planning for themselves and they're not thinking about the fact that their wife might outlive them and might live another 20 years past them and they're not thinking about that. And that's you know it's common. It's not just, I shouldn't say it's nothing against them. It's just that that's the lens that they're looking through things with. And so you want to be sure that when you're working with a couple, you're looking at through both of their lenses to make sure they're both being taken care of.
yeah, I think that's so important. And, and to really emphasize what you're saying is the majority of women are going to be in charge of money at some point in their life just because of life expectancy and longevity. Is so if you are a woman listening to this and you're not actively engaged with your money, this is your call to action to take an active role because you're most likely going to outlive your husband by 7 to 8 years at minimum.
Yeah,
And so you are going to be in charge of your own money at some point. So, take an active role. And if you're a husband, the best gift you can give to your spouse and to your kids is to talk to them about the decisions that you're making and
yeah,
make sure that they understand, or maybe not understand, that's the wrong way to phrase it, but that they're part of the conversation and that you're making decisions together. So,
exactly. Yeah.
so let's get into what I call the Get Ready Hot Take Trio. These are three quick questions that I ask all of my guests. The first one is, what's one money myth you're trying to break?
Oh, a money myth that I'm trying to break. Well, I think with my clients, I think the money myth that I try to break mostly with them is the myth of of their worth, what they're worth in the marketplace and what they can make as a salary. Like that with women, that's a common myth that I try to bust with them.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And, and for people who've been watching and listening to the show for a while, you know that this is something that we've covered is that you have to ask for your worth. And it's something I've posted on International Women's Day. If you are running a company and there's a woman who's not making the same as a man in a similar position, all you have to do is just increase the salary of the woman so that she's making the same as a man. It's pretty simple. But as a woman is, to reflect on what you said, because I think that is so valuable. If you're doing the exact same work, you deserve to be paid the same amount. And unfortunately, no, very few CEOs have taken me up on my call to action. So you are going to have to take action yourself and ask to be paid what you're worth. Um, so that's such great advice. So let's get out the time machine for a minute. If you could go back in time, knowing what you know now about money, what advice would you give your younger self?
Oh my gosh, save something. Compounding
Yeah.
interest. Like just put it, oh, even it's a small amount, the smallest little amount. I feel like And this is advice that I give to other people too. Like when you're starting out, you're just living paycheck to paycheck because you're just trying to survive. And there's nothing there that you feel like you can set aside to save, but just do it. Just pull it out and hide it away so that you don't even remember it's there.
Well, that's what they talk about. Automated savings, contribute to your retirement plan with it, which is automatically deducted from your paycheck. You don't even have to think about it. And if you have a 401k, you're most likely going to get a match to some degree. So
Yeah.
very easy to do it. Great advice. So last question is, what is your number one tip to change the way we think about money?
Pay attention to your feelings. When you're spending money, when you're saving money, when you're making a purchase, when you're hitting, add to cart, just pay attention to how you're feeling. When you're paying your bills, things like that. When you're looking at your credit card bill, what are you feeling? And and understand how there is so much emotion tied to money and understand your emotions with money.
That is wonderful advice because really, money has very little to do with the financial decisions we make. It's all about our emotions, and as you've talked about on a show earlier in the conversation about our mindset, and all these other things are going into our thinking that the actual pro and con oftentimes has very little to do with our decision making process. We're not logical when it comes to money.
Right. Our decisions are mostly emotional.
Yeah, I love that. So, Linda, where can people learn more about you, the Me Money Method, your work, and tune into the Real Money, Real Life podcast?
Well, the best place to find everything all in one place is my website, lindagriz.com, LINDAGRIZ.com. That's the best place. You can find my socials, my information to contact me. My podcast is on there, Real Money, Real Life. So, yeah, that's the one-stop shop for everything there.
Fantastic. And for people watching and listening, if you have access to the show notes, there will be links to Linda's website and social media profiles so you can check out her work and find the podcast. So, Linda, thanks for joining us today on the Get Ready Before Life Happens podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Tony.
Yeah, this is a great conversation. And thank you, everyone, as always, for tuning in. If you learned something today to change the way you think about money, please be sure to like and subscribe and to even share with a friend. You can also go to my website at tonystewart.com to join the Get Ready movement to receive my newsletter and access to a whole bunch of free resources. Until next time, let's change the way we think about money.